Welcome to Local Control, Scenario 4, Intersecting Runways. So hopefully you've already looked at Task 48 prior to this so that we can kind of really understand the concepts. All right, so what you have here, this is actually a depiction of Mojave's runway configuration. You have 3 intersecting runways. What's really interesting about this is that you could have patterns, left and right downwinds, or overhead patterns to all 3 runways. So that you have to think about a ton of things when you do that. Some key points to remember is projected flight paths. You have to be able to see out, visually observe in your mind a picture of where these aircraft are going to be and how long it's going to take them to get there. You have to think about their pattern altitudes. So in this example, I'm not using Mojave's pattern altitudes, just for a little bit more familiarity for you. I'm using Edwards pattern altitudes. So we have an F-16 that's approaching downwind at 3,800. A C-12 that's midfield downwind for a different runway, for runway 26 at 3,300. And then the pattern altitude for the Cessna is going to be like it is at other places, not at Edwards, where they're going to fly 1,000 foot downwind. And these also at 3,300. So you also have to consider aircraft characteristics. Maybe certain aircraft require a longer runway. That's maybe why the aircraft, the F-16 is on runway 30. And for the runways, you can see based on the circles. So the blue circles indicate runway 26 and 8, the green runway 22 and 4, and then the red runway 30 and 12. So like I said, the F-16 might be requesting a longer runway. The C-12 may not need that long runway. And then the Cessna might be doing an approach. So at Mojave specifically, there's only one GPS approach to one runway. And that GPS goes to runway 4 or runway 22. So that means that if that aircraft needs a GPS approach, that might be why he's requesting a runway that's completely different than all the other aircraft that are flying. Doesn't mean you have to approve it, but we'd like to try to provide the best services we can. And with 3 aircraft, in this scenario, I believe that we can make separation exist. We can have a safe and efficient flow of traffic, getting everybody as much as we can what they want. We also need to think about pertinent traffic. So in this situation, I want you to think about who needs traffic on who. I know this is a little bit of a complicated, this is not just one intersecting runway, but these philosophies and tactics you can use out to 2 runways, 3 runways, 4 runways that are intersecting. It just kind of depends on what the situation is. But I want you to really think about it. Who needs traffic right now? Who needs to know about each other? So if you want to, you can pause before I bring up what I think should be done, or an idea of what you could do. So what I would do in this situation, the first aircraft I'm going to talk to is going to be the F-16. I'm going to say Zoom 1, traffic C-12, left midfield downwind, runway 26. On the go, remain at or below 2,800. Check wheels down, runway 30, wind calm, clear touch and go. Now, what's interesting there is I told him on the go, remain at or below 2,800. So that's 500 feet separation from the aircraft that's going to be on the downwind. I specified that he was in left traffic, so he knew where to look for that aircraft. Because if he was in right traffic, he'd be on the other side of the runway, further down the runway. I could have also said remain at or below 2,800 till passing runway 26. That's another thing you could have done. But what I want him to know is that if he decides to go around, or he touches down and gets airborne prior to runway 26, that he needs to be below and stay low, and then the reason why. The next thing I'm going to say is I'm probably going to talk to the C-12, since he's the next closest to the runway. I'm going to say Cobra 1-2, traffic F-16, right approach in downwind, runway 30, report base. So he understands what's going on with the situation. If I had to, if the F-16, for whatever reason, took longer, I could maybe extend his downwind. Or if I waited too late and he's in the base, I could have him carry through final and do something else with him if I thought he was going to be in unsafe proximity to that F-16. I'm then going to talk to the C-12. Cessna Eta Delta, traffic C-12, left midfield downwind, runway 26. Additional traffic F-16, right approach in downwind, runway 30, for a touch and go. Report 2 mile final. So in this scenario, I want to make sure he understands there's a C-12 that's conducting a landing to a runway that intersects his runway. Also, that there's an F-16 conducting a landing approach to a different runway that's intersecting, and the type of landing that he's doing, which is a touch and go. And the reason I want to tell him it's a touch and go, so that he understands that that aircraft is not just landing and is going to exit at one of the intersections that are available, but that he is going to be on the go and going to be traffic for him in the future. I'm also telling him to report 2-mile final instead of clearing him at 5 miles. The reason for that is I want to make sure that at 2 miles, he reminds me where he's at, so I can either update him on his traffic or give him additional instructions. It might be a little late for some aircraft at 2-mile final, but for a Cessna, they probably have enough time that they can do something else or go around at that point. So we're going to go to the next slide. All right, so we fast forward a little bit. C-12 is now over the runway 30. The F-16 is now on the go for runway 30, and he's at or below 500 feet AGL. We also have the Cessna now that's carried down a little bit closer, maybe a mile or two down final than he was, and the C-12 is about to turn base. So again, who needs to know about who? Would you update anybody? Would you do anything different at this point? I'm curious what your thoughts are. And if you want to go ahead and pause it, think about what you would say. And then in a second here, when you're done, go ahead and unpause it and see what you think that I would say. So, first aircraft I'm going to talk to is the C-12. I'm going to say Cobra 1-2, caution wake turbulence, F-16 departure, check wheels down, runway 26, wind calm, clear touch and go. So you might be thinking, why am I doing it now? According to the .65, we give clearances at appropriate places in the pattern. At this point, I have time. And when I have time, I'm going to do what I can with that time. So the most useful thing I can do at this moment is to clear that C-12. That way I don't have to talk to him again. I'm not going to update him on the F-16, but I'm giving him that wake turbulence call. The reason I'm giving the wake turbulence call, if you think about for runway 30, if you're operating off of one runway, and you have an F-16 depart at the approach end of runway 23 at Edwards. If you have an aircraft depart at the approach end of a runway for runway 23, and then you have a C-12 at the intersection at Bravo, there's going to be wake turbulence for that C-12. So if you think about it, it's similar in this scenario. You're going to have an F-16 departure, and then you're going to have him do an approach, the C-12, to an intersecting runway, going to be flying right through that same wake turbulence. So in my opinion as a controller, I'm going to issue that caution wake turbulence call. The next call I'm going to go to is the Cessna. I'm going to say Cessna Echo Delta, caution wake turbulence, F-16 departure, runway 30. C-12 traffic turning base, runway 26. Check wheels down, runway 22, wind calm, clear touch and go. Now I told him to report 2-mile final, and he hasn't reported yet. But now I believe the situation has progressed that I don't think it's a factor, and I no longer need him to report 2-mile final. That's why I'm giving his clearance. I'm also giving him the same caution wake turbulence call because it's going to be even more effective for that aircraft because, one, it's later down the runway, and the Cessna is a lighter aircraft that's going to be affecting greater than the C-12 will be. All right, we'll progress a little bit further. Now we have the F-16 over the departure and requesting closed traffic. The C-12 is short final for runway 26, probably about to touch down. And then you have the Cessna, about 2-mile final or so for runway 22. Okay, so now in this scenario, again, are you going to say anything different? What are you going to tell this F-16 that one's closed? At this point, you have the option. You can give them a right closed. You can give them a left closed. There's no set way that you have to do this. Just whatever is the safest. But again, you have to think about projected flight paths. If you give them a left closed, where is his traffic going to be? Is it going to be a factor? Is it going to be a factor for anybody else? If you give him left closed right now, and that C-12 decides to go around, maybe there's something on the runway, maybe something was wrong with his aircraft, he forgot to put his gear down, or he's getting a bad indication, and he decides to go around. If he decides to go around and you gave that F-16 left closed traffic and no kind of altitude restrictions, you could have a potential conflict. In this scenario, I'm kind of curious what you would say to these aircraft and how you'd want to get them to where they're going. Don't be too critical about yourself on this if you've never done intersecting runways before. And this is quite a complex intersecting runway situation. But I'm really curious about your minds and what you're thinking, how you're thinking about it. And so go ahead and pause it. Decide if you're going to tell anybody anything, and if so, what are you going to tell them? Okay? I'm curious what kind of ideas you came up with. All right, we're going to progress a little farther. What I would tell the F-16 is I'd say zoom 1, climb to pattern altitude, then make right close traffic. Traffic, Cessna 172 on final runway 22. So a couple things to note here is I'm not telling him specifically where on final that traffic is, and I'm not giving that traffic first. Think about that. Should I have given traffic first, or should I have given him closed? What I chose to do is give him a control instruction that's going to avoid that traffic, and then I told him why, which is the actual traffic call itself. If you were to say close traffic approved or make right close traffic, you'd have to first issue that traffic first on the Cessna. You'd have to say traffic Cessna 172, 2-mile final runway 22, right close traffic approved. So you could do that, but what I would choose to do is zoom 1, climb to pattern altitude, then make right close traffic, and then I tell him about why I want him to do that. And a high performance aircraft, it's really not a problem to have them get to the pattern altitude. It's a very small thing for them. They can get there in a few seconds. So this is what I would choose to do in this scenario. So let me fast forward a little bit. Okay, so now we're cutting it close. In this scenario, you have a C-12 that has not crossed the intersection for runway 22, and you have the Cessna 172 about to touch down. So in this situation, if that Cessna were to touch down prior to that C-12 crossing the departure end, you would technically have a bus separation, intersecting runway separation. However, think about the consequences. If we flip this around, say that was an F-16 landing runway 22, and that C-12 hadn't crossed the intersection yet. If you send them around, depending on the scenario, if it's really close, you could have additional traffic conflict. Best case scenario, if you thought it was too close, you should send them around earlier and then tell them to make right close traffic. In this scenario, I believe in another second or so, that C-12 will be past the intersection prior to that Cessna touching down, but it is something that you have to consider. So I'm curious, again, if you guys would do anything different, or how would you guys continue this scenario? For now, this is as far as I'm going to go with the scenario, but feel free to kind of mess around with it in your mind, go back to other images, kind of see what you would do differently, other traffic conflicts, drop another aircraft in and see how complicated that would be. How would you bring somebody, if you think about this in the north, south, east, and west, if you brought somebody in from another aircraft from like the northwest, how would you get him to a pattern? Maybe change it up. How would you get him to runway 30? How would you get him to runway 26 or to runway 22? Or if you flip the orientation around, and now we're working off of runway 12, 4, and 8, how would it look differently? This is really just, there's no wrong way of doing these things, except unless you're breaking separation. So play with these in your mind, figure these puzzles out, and think about new and inventive ways to do something, to complete a task, to provide the best service we can while being safe. What other restrictions could you do? What other things could you do with the aircraft, like 360s, or have them fly a wider downwind, delay their turn to base by staying downwind. And so now let me transfer you over here now to Edwards. So we're here at Edwards now. On the lake bed, we have intersecting runways. However, more commonly, the only type of runways that we're going to be using with conflicting pattern approaches is going to be non-intersecting or diverging runways. So in this example I'm showing you, we have lake bed runway 30, left or right, your choice. And then we have runway 23 left and 23 right. We have a T-38 on final for lake bed runway 30 left. And then we have an F-16 in the overhead for runway 23 left. And then we have the C-12 on final for 23 right. These are all conflicts. And I'm curious, I'm not going to tell you how to figure this one out or what I would say. I just want you to think about what you would say. I want you to think about what your conflict points are going to be and how you would tell aircraft about these other aircraft, or even if you have to. What would be if this aircraft decided to go around? Say the T-38 decides he wants to go around right now. What are you going to tell him? So I'm curious about that, and we'll talk about that more when we have our live session. But for now, just think about that. And then the next task that I'm going to send out is going to be task 48. And that's going to, or correction, task 45, which is going to specifically talk about diverging runways. And then we'll work a scenario out with diverging runways. Thanks for joining us, and have a good day.